Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. All right, this is part 2 of a 2-hour interview I did with my friend Srini. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, go back and watch part 1 first, or listen to part 1 if you're listening on the podcast, and then go back and go ahead and watch part 2.
Yes, it is. We can easily break those arguments logically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those arguments don't even stand the test of today's time, let alone future. Yeah, they are very weak. There are two big questions in science today. I mean, there are many questions. I think the two biggest ones are, what does matter? I mean, all these things that make up the world, the things, right? What is the stuff that makes up those things? So, we started this journey. I mean, the Greeks started it. They said there's all atoms. And then that stayed for 1,000 years. And then somewhere in the mid-19th century, we restarted that work. And they said, oh, there's atoms. And then they split the atom. And then they found that there's some more stuff, bits inside the atom. And we've been splitting those bits, for the last 100 years. And every time we split the bit, we find there's something else inside it. We still haven't figured out what is matter. And by matter, what I mean is like everything, which is not just tangible, things that we can touch and feel. I'm talking about energy, force,
Gravity,
gravity. All of these things are, expressions of something, one
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's expressing itself in different ways. And one of the ways it describes is material objects. And so this table that I sitting in front of the chair I'm sitting on seems very solid. But even science is telling me there's nothing there because most of the atoms are, empty and, all minuscule mass. So there is some beautiful magic trick going on here, and science is fascinated by this, and they haven't figured it out. So there is this particle theory. They say there are 12 fundamental particles, and then there's another theory that says it's all a bunch of strings. Each particle is like a string, and it doesn't really exist, and it just oscillates, and every time it oscillates, it manifests, and then it doesn't manifest. And somehow all of these at the building block level come together and create this illusion that something exists.
Yeah.
So this question is, what does matter? We don't know the answer. Honest to God, no scientist will claim that he or she knows the answer to this question. And there's nothing wrong with not knowing the answers. These people are really smart people.
Mm-hmm.
I fully respect them. Lack of answers does not mean a lack of competence. It's the nature of the journey.
Right.
The other big question in science is, what is consciousness? And sadly, that question, we have made very little progress. We have done a lot of work on the world, studying the world. We haven't studied the most basic aspect of ourselves, which is that we are conscious.
Right.
We do not know what makes us conscious.
Right.
The operating theory in science today, in neuroscience, which has just started studying this in the last 50 years, and some progress made in the last 20 years, that consciousness is a phenomenon that emerges out of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And they are all frantically searching for where within the brain does this consciousness arise.
I just kind of laugh.
And so, yes, it's a little bit of a kindergarten stuff compared to the philosophers of India who studied this 3,000 years back. Those guys were way ahead. I mean, right? So, so that's the predominant view in science. That so the way I would categorize. So this is matter and consciousness. The other observation in science is these two are treated as two separate questions. One is a question of physics, and the other is a question of neuroscience.
Mm-hmm.
But the ancient traditions, I've read, treat them as connected to the question.
Mm-hmm.
What matter and consciousness are connected. And there were these 4 schools of thought on this. And they're largely based on what takes precedence. So there's the first school of thought that says matter is primary,
Mm-hmm.
which is the modern view of the scientists today. And this, by the way, this view was there 4,000 years back. These were the materialists of the day.
Yeah.
They said matter is primary and the brain creates consciousness, and that's all there is to it. Matter dies eventually, and your consciousness will die, and there is nothing more to it. And there is some hallucinatory experience that is going on that the brain creates, right? And they said there's not that's all there is to it. Matter is primary, and consciousness comes from the brain. That's the first school of thought. And the second school of thought is the exact opposite, which is consciousness is primary, and matter is emergent from consciousness, which is the theistic approach. The religions say that God is a superconscious being, and it is God who created the world with things in it, right? So out of consciousness came matter, this creation. And that's the second school. And there's a third school of thought. This is a almost 5,000-6,000 year old thought, which says both are parallel realities. Matter is they call it Purusha in Sanskrit. It's called consciousness, and Prakriti, which is not quite matter. It is this very fine, subtle field from which things emerge. And matter is not just chairs and tables. It's also thoughts, emotions, concepts, ideas, anything that can be expressed and described is matter, right?
Okay.
So all these things, these two are parallel realities, and the consciousness is described as lame, and matter is described as blind. So the lame entity is being carried by the blind. If you could think of them as two men.
Interesting.
The lame man is being carried by the blind man.
Okay.
And the man who can see is directing the man who can walk.
Okay.
So that is one school of thought. It is called the Sankhyan philosophy. And Buddha was heavily influenced by this. And then there's a fourth school of thought, which is the Vedanta school, the Brahman school, which says they are not two different things, they are the same thing. Right? So there is when you all of your folks debating, which is came first or which came second, you're barking up the wrong tree. They all came from the same thing. There's one thing. Matter is one manifestation of a reality, and consciousness is another one. So matter is equated to existence. The only reason we know something is matter is because it exists. So it's got a property. So those are the four schools. And I don't believe science has come anywhere close to having this level of sophistication that existed a few thousand years ago. I have no doubt they will, but there is a fundamental problem in studying consciousness as an object. If there is an object, then there's got to be a subject, an observer, right? If it's consciousness that is creating our subjective experience. It is like, I have a personal subjective experience every moment of my existence.
Yeah.
And so it is a very subjective experience. And how would I objectify it? As in, who is that person that is observing it then?
Right.
So it sort of logically lends itself to saying it's got to be the primary phenomenon here.
Yeah.
And that is the argument that's been made over several thousand years back.
Yeah, it's kind of like seeing your own eye. You can't see your own eye. So that's when we try to look at consciousness. It's like, from how can we separate ourselves from it in order to see it? It's inferred. We just have to not take it on faith because we experience it. So,
I think it's a big assumption or a big area to pivot around, because I was having this email exchange with a physicist called Sean Carroll. He writes on time. He's a physicist at Caltech, and he did a podcast, and they were talking about this matter and consciousness.
Yeah, I've heard of
him. He's like, I'm 100% sure the consciousness comes from the brain. Just give us some time, we'll figure it out. I'm a physicist, but I'm going to let my neuroscientist colleagues figure it out, and they will tell you. But take it to the bank, right? So I had this email exchange with him, and I said, how do you know what you're observing is true? Because it's happening in your consciousness.
Right.
And it so happens that when your experience and my experience agree, we call it a fact. That's all there is to it. Right?
Yeah.
And so isn't there something deeper? And we had one or two exchanges, and he sort of trailed off. But I think that is the fundamental question. Science is in the context of our experience. And so it seems like they are going to hit a dead end at some point if they continue to treat consciousness as something that is objectifiable. If they were to flip it and say it is the primary source, it could lead to some very interesting developments in physics, in my opinion.
Well, one thing you just said there, I want to go back over, because I think it's so important. You said it just so happens when your experience and my experience agree, we call it a fact, because we And it makes sense. We value the things that you and I both, if we both look at a picture on a wall, we agree that picture exists. But if I only see it, we call that subjective.
Yes.
And so there's a whole subjective world that goes on that I haven't experienced, and people dismiss those things because you can't observe it. So anything that goes on in my consciousness, you literally can't observe.
Mhm.
So we have this, we call this objective world because it's something that we can both agree on that experience, but it doesn't mean that my experience that you don't experience is any less important or any less real.
Right.
And so we dismiss things like near-death experiences. So a lot of scientists
Mhm.
will dismiss them because they're not observable.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean they're not real.
Yeah.
Or repeatable and observable. That's what science studies.
Yes.
Things that are repeatable and observable. But we also, science, that's when they get freaked out, when they start introducing consciousness, which consciousness is in every experiment. But when they deliberately introduce consciousness, then they go, well, how can this happen? The double slit experiment. When I observe a particle, it looks like a particle. When I don't observe it, it looks like a wave. How can this be? Because my consciousness can't affect the objective world.
Mm-hmm. I think some of the scientists who went down the rabbit hole in quantum physics saw the truth in some of these the Brahman theories, especially the Upanishads. Upanishads are the scriptures from which these statements were made.
Mm-hmm.
They are part of the Vedas, which are the scriptures of the Hindus. So Schrodinger, for example, the quantum physicist, he said the one consolation of my life has been reading the Upanishad.
Mm-hmm.
And he found a great resonance with the philosophers of their time.
Yeah.
They were doing different things. They were engaged in different pursuits. One
Right.
one group was trying to figure out the happiness equation, and Schrodinger was just trying to figure out the world.
Yeah.
But they found a lot of common ground. I think that's it's very revealing in the sense that science is about making life convenient.
Mm-hmm.
But life has to be worth living in the first place. That is not our primary consideration, right?
Yeah.
First, life has to make sense. Then comes the convenience part.
Yeah.
Religion makes our life worth living. I mean, practiced properly, and that's what religion sort of gives us. When I say religion, I mean the spirituality, religion, all as this. I don't believe them to be separate things. I think they are the same thing. And so there is, you can have a very convenient life filled with great unhappiness. That's not what we are shooting for, right? So I don't see these two as adversaries. Rather, I think it's somebody says you have to pick between science and faith. I would say you're giving me a false choice. You're putting me in a very difficult position.
Right.
I don't see myself as having to choose between the two, and they have their context in my life. So yeah.
There's confusion about what science is, because what a lot of people call science is actually materialism. Science, and I say this all the time, and people I get sick of me hearing me saying it, but science is a method. Science is a methodology. It should not be a philosophy.
Right.
And it's not there to tell us everything. And I love the way you put that. Science is not here to make us happy. It's here to make life convenient.
Right.
But meaning is what makes us happy.
Right.
Knowing who we are is what makes us happy. And we kind of talked about this, last week. And if we don't figure out why we're here, if we don't figure out our purpose, if we don't figure out who we are. And when I was in Sunday school, one of the brilliant things they said was everybody's made with a God-shaped hole. And they were talking about the God, the guy sitting on the throne. But I think that was a brilliant observation. As human beings, we're always seeking to fill that void that we have in us. Who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? And science doesn't answer any of those questions.
Right. My thoughts on this will evolve over time. I'm confident, because I feel like some of them have come up in my mind of late. So I will caveat before I say this. My observation, at least of myself, is that fear rules a lot of what we do. It is, and these are all different manifestations of something fundamental. Fear is one major manifestation. So what I mean by that is, when I'm happy, I fear that I'm going to lose my happiness. The immediate reaction is, oh, I shouldn't be so happy. I should, I have no business being so happy. Something is going to happen here. So we live in this fear, and it destroys our ability to be happy. And it's a very human thing to do. So the question sort of becomes, what is it that, how do I overcome this fear? How do I know I'm going to be okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Right? We want to know, am I going to be okay?
Yes.
I mean, when I say I, it's like, are we going to be okay? I mean, all of us are. And the answer is yes. And so there is some faith aspect to it, saying, believing I am going to be okay. And to be able to sort of live that belief requires some training and practice. This is what our religions teach us, right?
Yeah.
They say it in different forms. God is going to take care of you, or Buddha says, control your mind, wield it like an instrument, just like how you drive a car, drive your mind. When you get on top of it, you'll be okay. So they all said it in different ways, but depending on whichever path is easier for us, we can take that. But I think the bottom line or the learning there is, we are going to be okay, and we have to believe that.
Wow, that was so brilliant. You're right. That is the ultimate question that we always have. Are we going to be okay? Am I going to be okay? And it doesn't mean that we're going to have a carefree life. It doesn't mean that we're never going to have any trouble, but we know that we're going to be, okay. And yeah, and I think that's right. Religion and spirituality, that's what gives us, that faith, that peace, that comfort, that, if I know that I am divine, if I know that I am eternal, if I know that everything will pass, the good and the bad, you're right. When we're happy, we're worried about, well, how long am I going to be able to hold this? But when we get this broader perspective, the way I look at it is like when I'm having a good moment or a good thing, I cherish it even more because I know that it's not going to last. But if I'm going through a tough time, I'm like, I know that's not going to last either. And that gets me through the tough time. So this, we can make time, this temporal existence, our ally, and know that which I came from, I will ultimately return to no matter what happens between here and there.
Yes. Truer words have never been said. I'm reminded of a story. I'll say it. You can cut it out if you don't have time.
No, go ahead.
There is this story. I love the story. I love telling the story. So there is this king in India, ancient times, and he's going through this really rough period. There is a famine in the land. Enemies are attacking all around him. People are unhappy. He's got his personal sickness. Everything that can go bad is going bad at that moment. And this Buddhist monk happens to be traveling through the land. So, this monk comes to visit the king, and the king, he asks the king, how are you? And the king says, not so good. Things could be much better. Everything has gone to hell, right? And the monk says, don't worry, this too shall pass. And he leaves. 20 years later, now by this time, everything has changed. The kingdom is prosperous. The king's son has grown into this handsome prince, is ready to take over. The people are extremely happy. Everything is going perfectly well. And the monk happens to be passing through the land. So he comes to visit the king, and he asks the king, how are you? And he says, things are good. Since we last met, everything has changed much significantly. He reels off all this list of things that are going well. And the monk looks at him and says, this too shall pass, and leaves. So it's this great wisdom from the Buddha. He says the impermanence of things. The happiness actually comes in understanding the impermanence of this world. It is a very counterintuitive thing. Impermanence leads to grief normally. But happiness can actually come out of it, in the sense that there is something that we are given a certain privilege of experiencing for some period of time or whatever, and we understand intuitively that everything is impermanent. Even God is considered impermanent in the Eastern traditions, right? Even the creator, we call him Brahma, he has a lifespan of 100 years in the Hindu mythology. So Brahma dies at the end of 100 years, and that's like in 300 trillion years in modern time. But even that Brahma, the creator, the one who created everything, in the mythology, I'm saying, not the Brahman, but this is a Brahma. There's a different. It's a god.
Okay.
Gods die. Gods die in some of these traditions. So the idea that there are two ideas I think which are very powerful from the Eastern thought that I would like to share. One is nothing is destroyed forever. Everything comes back. That is a very powerful idea. Nothing ever goes away. It's like once it's gone, it comes up in a different place, and then everything is changing, or things are impermanent. And these are connected truths. And when we see the interplay of these two truths, there is great potential for us to derive happiness. It is difficult to specify it in tangible terms, but we take it and apply it to our lives. We find that we can get some peace out of it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is, and I learned this from a little bit of studying Buddhism, this idea of letting go and impermanence, which is again counterintuitive because we want to hold on to the things that make us happy, which is what causes us suffering because we can't hold on to literally anything. So there's I'm actually interviewing a woman right now. I'm in the process of interviewing because she's paralyzed, so it's a back and forth process. But she has ALS, and so slowly things are being stripped away from her. But she studied Buddhism before she got this, so she realizes that everything is impermanent. And I'm reading her book, and she says something so brilliant. She says everything in life is always setting us up for death, the final transition, because everything comes in our life and goes away. It comes and it goes, and we have to learn to let things go. We're in high school and we graduate, we go to college, we get out of college, we get our job, we have our children, my cherished children. One has already passed to the next world, but my other she's 25 now. She's an adult. She doesn't live here anymore. So that I mourn the loss of my child, that baby that I had, because I want her back. Yes. But so everything is impermanent, but even death is impermanent. So that leads us to talk about what is death? And how do you view death? What it is.
I think similar to every other question. I view the question of death as a series of different types of truths. Mm-hmm. There are multiple truths with regards to death, mm-hmm. and each truth applies depending on where we are in our journey, and it could be the truth for us at that time.
Yeah.
So the options are, I think the laziest explanation for death is that it is the end of everything. Mm-hmm. I find it a very lazy explanation. It comes from nihilism, guys like Nietzsche and a whole bunch of existentialists in France, and Western philosophy largely said this is it. When you die, lights go out, and that's all there is to it. Don't worry about it, yeah. Right? It seems plausible, but it seems very lazy way to think about it. Especially when you see a lot of evidence to the contrary in nature. Nothing just goes away. Things come back. So, the idea that death is sort of permanent doesn't make sense to me. Then there is the Christian view or the Islamic view, which is when we die, there is an eternal self, and which survives death, and then we reach some place, either heaven or hell, depending on the dispensations of what we did in life. It's a step forward. I would say clearly a step forward from the nihilist and atheistic view that there's nothing going on after death. But there is this idea that something survives death in Christianity. I find that very interesting. And then you have the Hindu and the Buddhist view that says when we die, there is a subtle aspect of ourself that survives and takes possession of a physical body in the next cycle and is reborn. Mm-hmm. So the Hindu view of death is its beginning of the process of being reborn, and life is the process of starting to die, right? Mm. The cycle. The Buddhists believe that too. Mm-hmm. And so I find that the most interesting, plausible, if you ask me, because for me, logically, it explains a lot of things. And this is sort of related to karma, right? The whole idea of karma is a law of cause and effect. It's a cause and effect principle. I think it's very straightforward. It's commonsensical in some sense. It says if you do something, you will get something back in return. The consequences are guaranteed. That's what the law of karma says. I find it intuitively, right. In the sense, if I'm rude to you, you will be rude back to me. I've seen that happen in my life, and it makes sense. It's plausible.
Right.
But I think the difficulty in karma is sometimes that the consequences are separated in time from action. That's the non-intuitive part. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we do some things, and I've done something, and I think I've gotten away with it. Not so fast, buddy. Mm-hmm. It's going to come, right? So that is where the belief comes in. And what span of time are we talking about? Multiple lifetimes. This is there is this idea of rebirth, and we come back and we carry the karma and the luck and the baggage of what we have done in the past. It's both good and bad. It's not necessarily negative. If you have done good things, good leads to good. Bad leads to bad. It's a very simple equation in the law of karma. But it makes one think, oh wait, like, am I going to be weighed down by, let's say I've lived a million lives and all my, I've been a jerk, for most of it. Am I doomed? Right? It's
Right.
am I done? Am I
Right.
am I going to be in this loop forever? And the answer is no, because there is the possibility of seeing things a different way at every moment. Why that happens and how that happens, like in the cases of you and me, there was some life event that made us think a certain way. When our daughters were born, right? When we become a parent, when we get married, when we have a life partner, that's a life changing. All of a sudden, you have to care about someone else,
Right.
right? So the little things changes. Something could happen in the world that could change us, make us look at things a different way. I don't know how that happens, but we have the potential to change. And we see that too in our lives. We have seen people transform. We've seen ourselves change.
Right.
So change is possible. So we know that. So I think that is where the positive part of karma comes in. Until this moment, we have the weight of our destiny. Meaning what is happening right now, the fact that I'm speaking to you is a chain of events that started somewhere in some
Right.
distant past. But what my life is going to look like in the future, I control right now by my actions towards you, by the words I choose, by my attitude, and like by my ability to calm myself down and be able to see the truth. And the more and more we see the truth, the more and more we liberate ourselves from this cycle. This is the teaching.
I love the way you put that, because the thing about karma, again, I think it's misunderstood a lot by people here. And I was taught that karma was, okay, in Christianity, they're like, well, we have grace. And the Eastern religions, they just have karma. So there's no grace there. There's no forgiveness. There's no escaping from, you did something bad, then something bad's going to come back to you. And which also brings up the question, what is good and what is bad? So when you were telling your story about impermanence, it reminded me of a Taoist story about the nature of good and bad, where the farmer goes out and he finds a wild horse, and all the villagers come to him and say, "It's a great thing you found a wild horse." And he says, "Maybe." And then the next day his son's out breaking the wild horse and he falls off and he breaks his leg. And the villagers all come and they say, "It's a terrible thing that your son broke his leg." And he says, "Maybe." And then the next day, the army's coming through and they're conscripting people into service. The son can't go to war because he's broken his leg. And so you know how the story goes. We judge what's good and bad, but we don't know. We don't. So when we say, if I do something bad, something bad's going to happen to me. So when parents, a child will pass away, and they'll say, "Well, what bad thing did I do? What did I do to cause this bad thing?" Well, how do you know it's bad? We don't have that perspective to know it might have been their soul plan. It might have been their time to go back. And if we truly believe what Christians say that we believe, that they are in heaven with God, then how is that a bad thing?
Yes, I agree. There is a framework I have put together for myself, which is, I feel like there is a set of core beliefs that we have. These are maybe stated or unstated. They're very small in number, 1, 2, maybe 3. Typically 1 or 2, I think. And it's got to do with either something of the belief about who we are, or what is God, or it's literally one of these questions. And we sometimes state it very consciously, like we're doing right now. We're having a very conscious, aware discussion about these questions. A lot of times we don't, a good part of our lives we didn't.
Right.
We just carried these beliefs around, and something or the other is there. So this belief animates everything else. Our version, our views of good and bad, all the morals, our view of the world. These are transactional beliefs. They can change. They will change, and they will change as we grow older, or go to a different place, or depending on mileage, we see one thing or the other working for us. These are very sort of transient. But those 1 or 2 beliefs that we carry, they make a big difference to our happiness. The transactional beliefs may make a difference to our prosperity, our health, our I should not smoke. It's a transactional belief. I should be kind to others. Is a transactional belief, because if I'm kind to others, I will be treated well in society, and there is a quid pro quo aspect to it. It has but it all what I realized is these beliefs if for them to be strong, they have to be supported by a core belief. Uh, this is sort of the argument people have made against atheism, saying that if you don't have if your core belief is a negation of another belief, it makes it very hard to be happy.
Hmm.
You could be highly moral because you
Yes.
simply have the discipline. You will just like sort of soldier through it by
Yeah.
being a very good person. But
Yeah.
happiness eludes us. You could be a very good person and be unhappy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because a lot of times people say, well, if you're atheists will be amoral because they don't have any real beliefs. And I found the exact opposite. Most atheists I know are very moral people. It's like, and I'm analyzing, but it's almost like they're overcompensating.
Yes.
They're like, I don't need religion to be moral. I'm going to be more moral than those Christians are.
Yes.
But, you and I talked about this when we kind of did the pre-show last week, when we were just kind of going through some ideas. We all have a core philosophy. I'm just going to say what you said kind of a different way. We all have a core philosophy, and I've never really been interested in philosophy. I always thought it was kind of a waste of time, but we do, whether we know it or not. And that philosophy informs our life. It literally impacts every decision we make.
We'll get back to Grief to Growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.grief2growth.com, or text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grieftogrowth, www.patreon.com/GRIEF2GROWTH to make a financial contribution. And now, back to Grief to Growth.
If we think the world is a transactional place, we're going to behave in a transactional way. If we choose to be a good person for goodness sake, then we're going to be probably a happier person. If we know that we are this divine being in a temporary situation, and that you're a divine being in a temporary situation, it's going to impact the way I interact with you. It's going to even impact that transactional thing. If I believe I'm going to have a life review, which I do, and I know that I might be in a store, and I might smile at somebody, and who knows what kind of day they're having, and it could change their life. It's going to impact the way that I treat even strangers.
Absolutely. Beautifully said.
So all this is just, it's so important that we do examine these things. And you're right. We go through life a lot of times totally unconscious.
Yes.
Totally unaware.
We carry them around.
I'm sorry?
We carry them around.
Yes.
I'm saying, like it or not, whether we're articulating it or not, they are there.
Absolutely.
And we don't, so it's better to be conscious of what they are, understand, what they are, and why they came to be, in our minds or in our thing, and see if they're true.
Yeah.
I think that's a good exercise, right? So, this whole aspect is philosophy practical, right? I mean, the biggest fear when we talk about things like Brahman or Buddhism or the highest, the exhilarating aspects of Christianity or Islam, the fear is that all of them teach us to be selfless. It's a very core idea in religion that selflessness is the core idea, right?
Yeah.
So to be selfless, you have to understand yourself, and there are different techniques. One is, by looking at God, you see a reflection of yourself, or you look at yourself and to see a reflection of God. It's all the same thing, but they are like ways of understanding. Once you understand yourself, the idea is that you will become selfless because you see the self is the same as Brian and Srini are the same self thing, and the problem with that is it creates this fear of the selflessness we see in this world is not rewarded. The world punishes people who are generous, or we've seen that. It's not always the case, but selflessness, we worry, will lead to us losing in some way. It'll either we will lose our career or our relationships or bank balance. What's going to nice people finish last is like the expression we hear, especially in the Western culture. It's not so much in India.
Right.
Of late, it's happening in India too. In the US, it's all the fashionable thing to say that nice guys finish last, and you have to go get it and So the whole selflessness does not get a lot of prominence. So we worry about that. I think the way to think about it is that if you do not understand yourself, you cannot do a good job of anything that you're trying to do,
Right.
whatever it is that you're trying to do. And it is counterintuitive. If we actually invest our time in making ourselves happy, we are going to be very, very valuable to this world. Imagine a scientist who has understood the greatest mysteries of quantum mechanics, has also understood the nature of his or her own self. What a combination! That person will transform this world. We don't find those people, and when those people come along, we call them Jesus or Buddha or those names, right?
Yeah.
But we can be one of those people. I don't say this in any arrogance. I'm saying it is the nature of creation that we all have that capacity to be that way. And just the journey makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Just being on the journey, we don't have to worry about if we'll get there. And it looks very daunting. It is impossible for me to sit here and think that I'm going to be the Buddha someday.
Yeah.
It seems like such a distant thing. But the journey, just the very small incremental things make a big difference. That's the leverage is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
A small effort yields big results. Yeah.
Absolutely. Totally agree. There's one other concept that we wanted to discuss that was on our list of things. We want to talk about rebirth or reincarnation. Now, I'll just kind of go first and say that as a Christian, I was raised to believe that there's no such thing as reincarnation. It's one and done. You're in, you're out. What I found out later on in life, that there was reincarnation in the Bible that was actually removed by the guys in the early church because frankly, it's about control. They want to say you're one and done. You have to go to the church. If you don't go to the church and do all the things we tell you to do, God's going to send you to hell for eternity. So I know a lot of Christians are still hung up on the idea of reincarnation. But so I want you to talk about the Eastern idea of reincarnation, and then we'll kind of see where we maybe can kind of come together.
Sure. A quick observation on Christianity, right? Or the Islam and Christianity. The idea is that there is an eternal self, a soul that survives death and goes to God. So there is the idea that something survives, and so it's a small leap from there to saying that soul survives in a different body. It's just we're talking semantics at this point. If something survives death, that is the big hurdle to overcome. The big hurdle to overcome is, does something survive death or not?
Right.
And the moment we are on the other side saying something survives, then it becomes a matter of details. I find it sometimes I find it sort of strange that the Christians don't like the idea of reincarnation. And I suspect there is this sense of false urgency that has been created by the early practitioners of Christianity. They said, oh, I have to close this deal, right? To close this deal, if I tell these people they're going to live another 100 lives, no one's going to close the deal in this life.
Right.
So if I have to close the deal and convert this guy, I got to tell him, he's going to hell in the next 10 years. Else he's not going to see the light. So I can see some of the tactics in play that influence some of these beliefs. But I agree with you. I think some of the Gospels hint at rebirth. Even Jesus hints at it in some of his sayings.
He does.
The Eastern belief in rebirth is simple observation of nature. I mean, they were asking all kinds of questions like us, like the way we do today. Who am I? What is God? What is creation? And they looked around the world, and it contains so many beautiful things. And the question was like, how did these things come about? And so the theory that they came to was everything started with some fine, indescribable, subtle, thing, and then it evolved. So there's this theory of evolution in Hindu philosophy, which is not quite like Darwin's theory. I mean, in the sense that they're similar, in the sense both are theories of evolution. So it starts with something fine. The theory is something subtle, evolves into something gross or material. That's the nature of creation. So you have something very fine. It keeps on, morphing until you reach this very phenomenal world that we find ourselves in. But there are many other things that we are not aware of because of the nature of our senses, and we live in this constrained world. So the idea is that whatever one transforms into another, and nothing ever goes away. The whole idea that something can just permanently go away, for some reason, has never taken root in the Indian psyche. It's the strangest thing, and actually, it's quite a brilliant, thing. There is not much. There are not too many buyers for death is permanent, or when something happens, this is the end. Now, there are not too many takers. There's this whole belief system that revolves around cycle. Even time is cyclical, right? Is what the Buddhists and the Hindus say. So the whole idea of reincarnation or rebirth comes from that things don't go away. We get to come back. The big question there becomes, who gets to come back? Is it Srini who gets to come back in the next life? And how do I know it's Srini? And because I clearly don't remember what happened in my previous lives, right? So what is the point of this thing? And so the point of being reborn, there is no point or purpose. Like nature is not, or creation is not created so that it gives you some convenient explanations for your current existence. I think the way these beliefs have to be sort of looked at is in the context of how we can bring peace to ourselves.
Yes.
And peace comes, we notice this, peace comes when we understand something and believe it to be true. Whether it's a good truth or a bad truth, it's unpalatable or palatable. When we find there's some reason that we latch on to, something is, we say it's true, it gives us peace. And that is the context in which these statements were made. So I would say some of there are these truths that we are reborn. We go through the cycle, we have to play out this thing, and until we realize that there is this cycle going on, we are condemned to the cycle. The moment you realize that the cycle is how things operate, you sort of elevate yourself above the physical aspect and the mental aspects of existence, and you're liberated. That is the sort of the Hindu view. And there is another view, which is the Vedanta view, which says everything is a wave of, ocean of consciousness in which things come and go. So what you think of as birth and what you think of as death are superstitions. These are simple, merely experiences that your mind is, or your in your consciousness. So when you're born, that's an experience. When we die, that's an experience. When we sleep, that's an experience. When you're awake, that's an experience. When we dream, that's an experience. These are all a whole collection of experiences. And a person who understands that, the nature of consciousness, liberates himself or herself. So you have the Vedanta would directly negate the karma theory, saying that there is no such thing as birth or death. And again, I liken them to two different belief systems, lower, higher truth, and depending on where you are, one. And they are just convenient constructs depending on who we are as a person at a point. And we hold on to them. They teach us something until we are ready to accept something else.
Yeah, I think it's the thing about the idea of death and rebirth, because I've gotten it from several different ways now. There's soul planning, there's life between lives, so we go and we come back. And I'm learning a little bit about the Eastern view of it. I don't think it's as simple as a one-for-one thing. I don't think it's as simple as like I, Brian, die and come back, and then I'm going to be John in the next life, and then I'm Mary in the life after that. I think we're almost a collection. Our souls are more like almost like I hate the word Borg because it has such a negative connotation, but Star Trek, the collective, we have this higher aspect of ourselves. So I, as Brian, am just a small part of a more complex being, for lack of a better word. And when I go back, I share my experiences with the whole. They all get to experience it, but I don't come back. Brian doesn't come back, but there's another aspect that there's just kind of this interchange as we go back. And this is, I interviewed someone a couple weeks ago, but with a series of books she wrote called The Team, and it really resonated with me that we're not the individuals that we think we are. So, but I think there's so much evidence for some idea of rebirth or reincarnation. The work that was done at the University of Virginia with children with past life memories. I mean, just incredible stuff. Prodigies, people that come into this world, that can play the piano at the age of 2, and people with past life memories and have birthmarks where they were shot in a previous life. So there's absolutely something to it. And I love what you said about the peace thing, though, because I have a friend, and she was raised as a Christian, had a really tough life, and I remember we were starting to explore the idea of reincarnation. She said, every time I think about reincarnation, I just start crying because I do not want to be forced to do this again. Because that's the way, that was her view of life. And I said, if it doesn't bring you peace, then let it go. Because I don't think we're sitting back here as punishment. I don't think it's like you didn't get it right, you got to go back and do it again.
What your client said is identical to what the Buddha said. I think she's on the right track here, which is the Buddha said we are reborn only because we have a desire to be reborn.
Right. Right.
And the moment we abandon the desire, we liberate ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's a tendency. It's a constant thing within us. We love life.
Oh,
We
wow.
underestimate the person with the worst life imaginable on this planet will still not want to die. That is
Right.
the power of life, right? And so it is a very addictive, intoxicating thing. And so the trick is like, how do we convert it from being an addiction to
Yeah.
something that we simply experience and enjoy without the baggage of it? So
I'm so glad you said that. I've never heard it put that way, because it's always been, to me, it's been put like it's like almost like a punishment. It's like you got to stay on this wheel. But what you're saying is it's self-inflicted. It's like we want this. We keep coming back because we want to do it. And as soon as we stop wanting to do it, we don't do it.
That was the great insight of the Buddha. I think that is why I think we worship him as God. The Hindus worship him as God, even though he rebelled against Hinduism. So because that is a great truth that he said.
Yeah.
That our desire propels us every second of in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
If the moment you can, you engage but you detach, it's a very
Right.
that's the letting go principle. You don't come back. That's what he said.
I'm wow. Okay, that's something I got to take forward and let other people know, because I think that's a big misunderstanding of the idea of reincarnation. Now, we didn't talk about this, but I want to talk about your book, 3 Lives in Search of Bliss, because I tell you, I listened to it again this week, and it's just so brilliant. I love the way you integrate all these ideas we've talked about here into a very short story that's got so many layers of depth to it.
Thank you.
So
Thank you for your kind words.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to it again. I'm like, man, this guy knows. He knows the Quran. He knows the Hindu scriptures. The New Testament. The ideas of reincarnation and rebirth and desire. I just realized now as you said that, and I don't want to give away the end of the book, but as we get to the point where it's like, I don't have the desire, I don't have the need to do this anymore, that we can escape it. So, where did the idea for the book come from? How did you come up with it?
There was no specific event or phenomenon, something that happened that sparked the book.
Mm-hmm.
The way it happened was I think in some sense it was a culmination of things I had been doing for about 10 years prior to that.
Mm-hmm.
Which with my birth of my daughter, I started reading a whole lot of philosophy, asking questions. And a lot of it was very personal. I was not engaging with other people. I did not have a teacher. I was just reading books and sort of educating myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it all, I think, came together one particular year, the year I wrote the book. And these thoughts started bubbling in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, what is a creative way of expressing some of these ideas? And I love stories. I love reading books, right? And I said, can I write a book? I'm not a writer by any stretch of imagination, but I said, if I can somehow write a story, simple story, that narrates some of, through the narration brings out some of these principles, that would be great. So it started with no expectations in mind. Actually, in fact, I did not even expect to finish the book. So I let these thoughts bubble in my head for, I would say, a good part of maybe 6-7 months. And then I remember it was around a similar time, December holidays. I took 2 weeks off from work, and I already had like a week in that month for the Christmas week. I sat down and wrote it in 3 weeks. And it seems incredible that say somebody can write 200. I wrote 250 pages and sort of cut it down to 150. How can you write 250 pages in a month? It's just built up. I mean, I kind of knew the sentences. Some of these sentences were already in my head when I was writing, before I started writing. I think one-time, once in a lifetime type of thing, experience. I don't have that, and I don't feel that level of inspiration now. I haven't found that since. I would love to write more, but I just surrendered to the moment at that time.
Yeah.
In terms of the ideas I expressed, I feel I have read that book, and I read that book myself recently, and I feel like I have evolved quite a bit since then.
Yeah.
Not to say that I deny any of the concepts that I wrote there. I just said I feel like I have a little more nuanced take on something, and I'm thinking I should take it and not rewrite it but expand it.
Well, first of all, like I said, you came out of the blue. I don't even know how you found me. You said, I want to send you this book. I'd like for you to read it and give me your thoughts on it. And I was like, it's brilliant. And you told me at the time you had distilled it down. So it's very short. But it's funny because I had Bernardo Kastrup on a little while ago, and he wrote a book called More Than Allegory. And he talks about in his work about sometimes truth has to be expressed through myths. It has to be. It's ineffable. It can't be really put into words, and he has to put it. And actually, in his book, Materialism is Why Materialism is Baloney, he ends it with a story, like a creation myth. That's great. I loved it, and that's how I kind of view your book. I think it had to be expressed through the story, and then and every time I read it, and I've read it like 3 or 4 times, I get something else out of it. It goes to another level. And I just finished it this week, and I'm like, oh yeah, the ending. I know I really got the ending better than I had gotten it before.
Thank you. I remember one of my stated objectives when I wrote the book was I did not want it to look prescriptive.
Right.
The idea was to just lay it out,
Mhm.
and it spark a sort of a thought process.
Yeah.
In a person, and did not want to be opinionated or very specific about something. Although I feel like it has got a very strong Buddhist tinge to it.
Yeah.
And I am still, and I was very much a strong Buddhist at heart when I wrote
Mhm.
it, and I think that influenced me. But our idea was to be sort of stream of consciousness, and tell the story. I
Yeah.
think by nature, we humans are storytellers and listeners to stories. We love stories. We love telling stories.
Our lives are
So,
stories.
our lives are stories. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think,
One thing I want to say though, I talk to a lot of people that claim that they channel books, and I just interviewed someone yesterday that she's written several books and she says they're all channeled. I think your book was inspired. I don't think it came from Srini. It came from somewhere higher.
I agree. I
So
completely.
yeah, I think it's great, and I want to encourage people. It's a really short read. It's like you said, about 150 pages, but it really impacted my life. As I was reading it, and it's funny because I was realizing I got it before Shana had passed away, so it was before I was really on the journey that I'm on now. And reading it again now, it impacted me in a different way. So it's one of those things that every time you read it, it's going to hit you from a little bit different angle.
Thank you for saying that. I'm glad you continue to like it. The story of how I found you. I did a very simple thing. I went and looked at Deepak Chopra's books. I'm still a fan of Deepak Chopra. I love his books.
Mm-hmm.
And you had written a review on Deepak Chopra's book. I think one of Deepak Chopra's books.
Oh, okay.
So I saw your name and I said, if Brian likes Deepak, maybe he will like my book, and he might be more inclined to read it and be more sort of understanding of where it came from. The book that I wrote, I showed it to a couple of publishers. I was living in Bangalore at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, this book is not readable. This is not publishable. And they said, this does not it lacks a plot. There is no arc. There is no characters. You start with some character, you don't do justice to it, you keep moving on. And I said that the point of the story is not the characters, it's actually what happens to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I concede that this is not like classic storytelling.
It's not the hero's journey.
Yes.
Well, it is and it isn't.
It's different. So go ahead.
It is a journey. It's absolutely a journey, and I think, as I said, I find it to be brilliant. And the thing is, I think about my life now, and I think about, we talked about these formative events, right? And so you saw that I reviewed a book of Deepak Chopra. You sent me this book. We've been friends now for 9-10 years. You've really influenced my life a lot. Like I said, we're Facebook friends, and I'll be writing something. I'm like, okay, Srini's not going to like this because you really calm me down in a lot of ways, and I love your wisdom and your compassion and the way you live your practice. And you talked about the book being maybe more Buddhist or whatever. It reminded me. I love C.S. Lewis. I read him. I think I've read everything he's ever written. But he talks at one time about the Tao. I think he pronounces it the Tao, but the Tao. And he says, this is the eternal truth. Mm-hmm. And he said, one of the things is people would criticize Jesus or Christianity because there was nothing new there.
Mhm.
And he says there is no new moral truth. All moral teachers do is remind us what we already knew.
Mhm.
And as we look at all these faiths and we put them in categories, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Judaism, then we say, well, this is more like, no, there's one truth. There's literally one truth, and all these things are different ways of expressing it. Which is why I don't call myself Christian anymore. And I've studied Buddhism, but I've never taken the vow, so I don't call myself a Buddhist. There's things about Hinduism that I've found recently that I absolutely love. I'll never forget the Brahman, Atman, thing, and I'll take that with me.
Mhm.
And as human beings, we're allowed to do that.
Yes. In fact, we should be doing that.
Yeah.
The most practical goal, I mean, we believe we are being practical when we go in search of, like, we want to get into college, we want to have a career, I want to make money, I want to buy, this, whatever. Like, we have these things we call practical.
Mhm.
And it sort of comes from this belief that we are very limited beings.
Mhm.
This is all I can do. Like when you say there is Brahman, or there is this idea of God, this exalted, idea of God that's going to give you great joy, we say, oh, wait, it's very complex philosophy. And I am not capable of that. I'm a very simple person, and I can only do this, which is fine, which is nothing wrong with that. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the most practical goal? I mean, yes, you can buy a new car, you can get a new phone, whatever. And what we find, like, this is very cliched. We all know this. Like when we buy something, the joy, only lasts for so long.
Right.
Then we have to find the next thing. And this treadmill that we are on, we will get tired. And then at some point, depending on who we are, whether it's in our 40s or 50s, unhappiness is bound to set in. It is it is no surprise. So the question is then, what is the most practical goal? What all these things that we consider practical are not getting us anywhere. And so we are saying philosophy is not practical. It's not. But I feel like it's the most practical thing one can do, because the most practical goal in human existence is to find peace.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, it is the most practical, goal, if you think about it, because that is what we are trying to do when we do the other things.
Yeah.
No one goes to work for the fun of it. I mean, at the root of it is that, am I going to be okay?
Mhm.
And the answer to that question is, to find peace. So I feel like that is one way to look at philosophy, and or invest in. So we don't even have to make it complicated and read all the books out there. All we have to do is start examining our own experiences.
Right.
What
Yeah.
makes me conscious? What makes me see the world a certain way? We ask these questions. I mean, these very simple questions give us like enormous mileage.
Yeah. It's interesting as what you were saying, I was thinking about the idea of people pursuing things, and I think that's why rich people tend to be the most miserable people on the planet.
Yes.
Because when we don't have those things, we can keep telling ourselves, well, as soon as I get that, I'll be happy. But when they get all that stuff and they sit around and they look at their lives and are like, I'm still not happy, then they're the most miserable people, because there's nothing left to reach for.
Right.
And I want to kind of close this, because you said that, I was thinking about the words of Jesus, because I'm still a follower of Jesus. And Jesus said, store up for yourself, treasures in heaven, where thieves cannot break in, and moths cannot, just corrupt, and, it can't rust. I mean, Jesus is like, store up treasures in heaven. So again, as a Christian, we were thinking literally we're going to have boxes of gold when we get there, but it's really it's this inner peace. It's growing ourselves. That is the most practical thing. That is the only thing that really matters, is peace. You can have everything else, and if you don't have peace, you've got nothing.
Completely agree. The kingdom of God is within you, is what Jesus said.
Yeah.
And I think that is, the true. I mean, that those are words to live by.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great way to end. I want to say, Srini, I really appreciate you doing this extended interview with me. This is really the first time we sat down and talked face to face, and all the time we've been doing this, but we need to come back. We need to do this again.
I absolutely will. I've always wanted to do this, and I can think of no better person to have this conversation than with you. I feel safe. I feel like, I will be understood. And, if I'm saying something wrong, I know that you will, guide me. And so I feel very comfortable having these conversations.
Awesome.
And
awesome.
I absolutely, we should do this again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Srini. You have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Should I go ahead and leave?
That's it for another episode of Grief to Growth. I sure hope you got something out of it. Please stay in contact with me by reaching out at www.grieftogrowth.com. That's grief, the number 2, growth.com. Or you can text the word growth to 31996. That's simply text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. Since you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure you're subscribed. So hit the subscribe button and then hit the little bell here, and it'll notify you when I have new content. Always, please share the information if you enjoy it. That helps me to get more views and to get the message out to more people. Thanks a lot and have a wonderful day.